Hello there. Back again with our not so many viewers again, but okay. Welcome back to another section of John Squared. I'm here, John Ray, back with my co-host, my partner in crime with this, John.
Glad to be back.
Sasha.
Glad to be back.
All right. So I'm sure all of you were wondering what indeed happened to us. We did not die. We were actually quite busy doing quite a few different things. So before we get into all that, I'd like to ask John Sasha, so how have you been the past few months? What should our one viewer now, who just tuned in, thank you, and the one like, what have you been up to since then?
Well, first of all, I think that obviously there will be way more viewers coming in, and the reviews, and then you can watch the recording. It will be, of course, blowing it all out of the water. There will be millions of people watching this. What I've been up to, teaching, going live on the other channel, which you will mention in just a bit, I believe. And other than that, enjoying working from home by trying to be smart and also work from a idyllic destination, and that didn't go as planned because everybody that follows me on any social media channel knows, I stepped on a sea urchin and I suffered for the past 6 weeks. But this week it's gotten better. So now I'm feeling much better. I'm excited and I'm glad we're back. How about yourself though?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've been doing pretty well. Somehow we've been able to cope through the full online session. So we've been online for the whole duration of that. I'm sure the students have all been talking to us about how that's been going. This is probably the first year, by the way, John Sasha, that our first year students have not actually physically met any of their classmates yet. They've only met through Microsoft Teams and Google Classroom, and some have met through Zoom. So that is something that I think is an interesting thing there. Somehow, though, they have actually been able to make connections with each other. So that was interesting to kind of witness. I also had students using gather.town. Interesting new app that kind of gamifies and makes learning, or virtual meeting, I should say, happen in a 2D video game environment. So that was interesting and expensive. Was quite an interesting experience though. So I'm always kind of thinking about kind of all these costs, and you know, as we all know, there are so many different applications that we can use that we have to pay for. Some a lot, like Gather is not cheap, but there are others that are not so expensive, but still, if we have too many subscriptions, that's not always a fun thing to do. Was also able to go to Phuket, but for me, I also made sure when I went to the beach, I was wearing shoes. So I made sure also no sea urchins around me. Did spend most of my time at the resort only near the pool. I felt like after John Sasha's experience, which he told me about, I was thinking, yeah, I want beach and sand. Maybe we'll stay away from the sea creatures. All right, but anyway, that sounds like a harrowing experience, Sasha. So what exactly happened? I'm sure that some people who were on social media were kind of following along there, but what exactly was I just heard sea urchin, unfortunate step, but what else happened there that led to the, I assume, multiple hospital stays or multiple visits from the doctor? What happened there?
Yeah, so I went to Koh Chang for a few days because work from home, so you can work from anywhere. So I thought, hey, work from Koh Chang, right? No one else there right now. We are fully vaccinated now, so let's go. Went to Koh Chang. Went on a Sunday. I went on like a boat trip to like one of those lonely, idyllic beaches out there. No one else there besides us and the boat guide. He led us out on this idyllic beach. We're only 2 people. The boat guide stayed behind on his boat, so we were exploring the island and jump into the water. Usually I'm very careful, but like in this very moment, there were just like so many flies around. I'm like, oh God, I'm sweating so much, the flies. Let's jump in the water so the flies disappear. And this one time that I'm not careful in regards to where I'm stepping, I step on a sea urchin when I jump into the water to get rid of the flies. And I'm not exaggerating, it was one of the worst pains in my life because I jumped on it like with my full weight, like 82 kilos right on the sea urchin. And I thought, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but it's the worst pain I ever felt. And I do Thai boxing. So it was way worse than getting kicked in the ribs, punched in the liver. It was definitely worse. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know it was a sea urchin. I never stepped on something like this before. So my foot was just like pulsating and I couldn't move. I was just lying on the floor, hitting the sand. Like it hurt so much. The boat guys came and then, we have to bring me back to land, of course. It's a 45-minute boat ride. I thought I'm going to die on that boat ride. Then from the pier, it was another 45 minutes to the next hospital on Koh Chang. There are two hospitals. One is a Bangkok hospital. The other one is a cheaper one, but the Bangkok hospital was closer. So I said, okay, let's go to the Bangkok hospital. So 90 minutes in one of the most painful situations I ever had. I arrived at the hospital. They're like, hey, it's a sea urchin. Like, yeah, okay, it still hurts. And then they just got me on antibiotics, on like IV drips, and then put my foot in some water acid solution to somehow negate the pain. And then my foot was just swelling up like crazy. It was like, triple the size of my normal foot size. So I had to stay on antibiotics for a while. Came back to Bangkok, still on antibiotics, went again to Bangkok hospital because I thought, hey, Bangkok hospital in Koh Chang, Bangkok hospital in Bangkok, they might share a system so they know what medicine I took. Turns out they didn't. Not hating on hospitals now, but it's the same brand and they didn't know anything about what happened. And that's a bit disappointing. So I went to Bangkok hospital a few more times. I got more antibiotics, IV antibiotics for a bit. And it's been 6 weeks now. And yesterday was the last day of medicine that I took. I took for a week, I had to take steroids, like some inflammation reducing medicine with steroids in there. So I'm hulking up now. And yesterday was the last day of medicine, 5.5 weeks since I stepped on that thing. So lesson learned in the future, shoes only.
Just a quick question, though. That wasn't the first day, right? That was as you were already into your trip, right? Wasn't the first day?
No, it was not the first day. It was like 3 days or 2 days before we were scheduled to leave.
Okay, because I was just thinking it would not have been probably ideal for a first day, go into the water, step on a sea urchin, and then I imagine that would not have been fun to have gone on the rest of the trip, which I assume was about a week.
Yes,
around.
Correct.
I assume you weren't able to walk for at least a day or two. No.
Oh, not at all. My foot didn't fit into any shoe or anything. I was just limping around for 5-6 days straight.
Yeah. Watch out for those sea urchins, kids. And definitely something to also be mindful about. But yeah, happy. So you did say that it's better now, 5 or 6 weeks out. So better now, less swelling, can walk somewhat normally.
Exactly, yes.
All right. So send your best wishes to Ajahn Sasha. Sounds like a very traumatic experience, but something that could easily happen to all of us. All right. So from one harrowing experience, we're going to try something new. So what Ajahn Sasha was able to kind of mention to us here, and something that he was helping us with, is we do have an Instagram live here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through that. Find my window here. It appears that our stream just went offline. Looks like we'll still be going, so let's record as if it is there, but it looks like our stream just ended for some reason. Let me try to make sure what is going on. We are having trouble streaming to Facebook, apparently. All right.
Not the first issue Facebook has these days.
Yeah, that actually leads us to our next kind of take here, which is the fact that I wonder if actually, now that you mentioned it, that Facebook outage that apparently I missed for some reason. Not sure why that happened.
How did you miss that? The world went crazy.
I heard about it after the fact, which what happened was I think it happened while I was sleeping, and then I saw on my feed massive outage on Facebook, Instagram, everything. So apparently StreamYard is trying to reconnect us. I'm looking at Facebook and it seems that our stream ended for some reason.
Yeah, I see that too.
So apparently they are going to keep trying. But in terms of that, that is one thing that we should probably mention about is why do we have these things that, I mean, we always take it for granted. Yeah, Sasha, we always assume Facebook is going to be there. But what are some of the underlying issues there that could lead to this? And apparently we are back online. We are back online.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. So for those of you who were kind of tuning in during that session, we apparently had an outage, which I guess does segue into it. So, Sasha, since I only heard about the outage, what was kind of the, and we're lost again. But never mind, let's keep going. What is kind of the outage situation? Did anyone say why Facebook went offline, and as well as all the other related apps? I believe that was IG, Snapchat, all these other related applications also went offline at the same time.
WhatsApp.
What was the cause? What was the cause there?
They didn't really say it. They apologized, of course, and they said server misconfiguration, but of course not exactly what was misconfigured, but apparently it affected internal and external communication alike. So also the internal Facebook system apparently did not work for around 6 hours. And so that's why Twitter was blowing up last night. Like all of a sudden my Twitter feed is way more active than usual, way more pictures than usual on Twitter. And I think even Twitter tweeted out something like, hey, welcome everybody. Because people need an outlet, it seems. No one can survive 6 hours without sharing their food and, I don't know, their feelings. But so around 6 hours, no IG, no Facebook, no WhatsApp. Which is interesting just because I think that just shows A, how much we rely on those things already. And B, that if Facebook, right, if Facebook suffers from it, then 3 of the major social networks are down. So question, is it smart to have this centralized like that?
So just to be clear to everyone, I'm going to try to fix that. So just so everyone is clear and it's not any of our issues, we're in a Facebook outage because I assume we're still recording to StreamYard. So just in case you all are wondering what exactly we're talking about and why we seem a bit discombobulated, it's because we are currently in a Facebook outage. And we keep seeing notifications that say our streaming is not actually going to where it is supposed to be going. So we're going to leave that sign right down there, just so you all know what has been happening. But anyway, let's continue on. So Sasha, what are we doing now on IG? What are some of the things that we're doing now on IG to engage more with fans?
Asking questions, and of course also posting fantastic memes like the Squid Game AJ² mashup I tried to post yesterday using all my Photoshop skills to make it look as real as possible, and then of course asking some questions to some of our followers there. There you go. Took me hours to get this together. And you can see some of the questions or like some of the thoughts, like what should we be talking about? And the social media supremacy. I found this interesting, like right after Facebook was down. Fair question though, of course, like what I said earlier, right? Does it make sense to have everything centralized? The class homework, that must be someone who took my class today about AI and blockchain, because that's what we talked about in class. So hey, don't throw your homework at us here. But I appreciate that you check your IG while you're in my class. Yeah, I think we had a few more in regards to beauty standards and of course hashtag activism as well. So I think lots of things actually that we already discussed, but it's nice that all of you are thinking about that. And the fan art, yeah. We'll talk about fan art once we get fan art. I'd say once you create some fan art for us, you can create like, yeah.
I would say they have a very high standard to try to meet with that fan art that we've just had as the example from you, John Sasha. So they have a high standard to go to. But any of those topics of interest to you? I assume it's probably not the one that sounds like a class homework, as in them asking you a question and then you giving them the answer that they then, hopefully they don't do this, but they copy back into their assignment. I assume that would not be so ideal. So which of these topics, and these were all right ones, I think that we can do stronger ones, I think, in future polling sessions, but which one did you find the most interesting that we should talk about as we're going through this Facebook outage?
Well, so I appreciate the try, though. Like, I'm going to try and ask my teacher about what I should be answering in his homework. So nice try. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you following us. So keep that up. But you have to answer that answer by yourself. You have to find it by yourself. As for the interesting topics, I mean, we already covered what Ajans are doing during the pandemic. So I think the hashtag activism is interesting. And for me, of course, as the new media guy, the brand supremacy of social networks is interesting. But the beauty standard thing it's always there, right? I mean, it's nothing super new, but it's just always there. And maybe actually, I think I would like to just. I thought I can ask a question, but then you told me you're not really watching Squid Games, because I had a question that's related to it.
I am trying to get into Squid Games.
Okay, so
for me, though, it's trying. We'll get there, I think. But haven't quite made it through the first episode, which was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be.
Fair, Emma. I'll keep posting Squid Game memes until you're into it. But just the thing that I thought that relates to the topic is that, of course, some of the main characters, without spoiling, some of the main characters, they fit the beauty stereotypes like very well again, and was just like, yeah, of course, there's like a handsome policeman, for example, and things like that. So even the super successful shows right now that are critically acclaimed, they still revert back to like those beauty standard things. But I think we discussed it before, haven't we?
Well, I feel like it hasn't changed a whole lot in the past few months, but then what I would ask, and this is probably something that we'll clip and post on our IG as a short little clip, is what exactly do you want us to say? Because both of us have already gone on record and said we don't like beauty standards. We believe that characters and interesting characters can be represented physically in a lot of different ways. So we've been on record for that. But I think that what all of you, especially our media students, need to think about is, well, why do we continue to have these same characters get cast over and over? Is it because they're famous or because they're beautiful? These are things that are not mutually exclusive, really. Usually, why does someone get famous? Oh, because they're beautiful, they have the white skin, they look like the typical role models. But then how do we start to change our role models if the role models look the same as they were back in the 90s, 80s, 70s?
I have an idea.
Yeah, go ahead.
Stop following only pretty people.
Yeah, that helps. That does work. And that's part of the reason why we want to have a discussion, because we always get beauty standards. Our upcoming class of John Sasha, JM204, Social Diversity and the Mass Media, we're going to talk about beauty standards again, but hopefully whenever we talk about role models, and I will just say it from my own experience, we always hear Captain America, Iron Man, in terms of deeper characters and characters that also represent like good qualities that we should have in our role models, we don't really hear about it. I do also hear Superman. I'm wondering if there's a bit better kind of diversity in the role models that are mentioned in your class, Sasha. Yes? No? Maybe?
Maybe. Well, if you ask about it like that, then no. Usually that's the mentions that I get. If I ask them, then how would you create the perfect role model? Then usually the answers are a bit more diverse. Then they're like, yeah, they should represent like different people, different types, and so on. But if you just ask for examples, then it's usually those cliche examples that you get. But once you then say, hey, but think a little bit deeper about it, like how would you create it in a perfect world? Then usually I do get better answers, but it needs this pushing towards like, don't just accept what's there. Don't just follow like all those super ideal stars, heroes, whatever, and maybe think about what could be done better. Yeah, I think that's an issue, but anyways, these days, like, because you if you consume media, you don't think about it, right? You don't think like, I shouldn't follow Lisa, and now everyone's going to hate on me because I mentioned Lisa. But don't just follow her because she's cute or whatever, but maybe think twice whether or not that's a star that you want to, I know, follow and praise and so on. I'm not saying she can't sing. Don't hate me right now. I'm just saying maybe if you complain about beauty standards, maybe you should use this also for your own measurement and say, hey, do I follow that person right now just because she's cute, pretty, whatever? Or is it the actual skills that make me follow that person?
Says it sounds like an experiment that we might like to do, because what you just mentioned, John Sasha, is kind of a weird conflict clash dichotomy. Dichotomy is the technical term for clash, in which they talk about more diversity, but then when we ask them about their role models, we don't get diversity. So it's kind of a weird like thing in which we want it, but then when we look at our own consumption, we realize we don't really ask for it. We don't really practice what we preach. And that is kind of something that, yeah, it might be something we have to talk more about with our students there. Mm-hmm. So that is something interesting and something that we would encourage all of you to talk about. So we're going to post this clip up on our IG, and we're going to ask all of you to comment. Why is it that we're still talking about beauty standards? What will it take for us to go from the theory of representing different beauty standards to then actually making sure it's implemented within society? That would be actually really good, especially for our students who want to work in media. So that is good. All right. So again, those of you that just joined us, we got a Facebook outage. We are trying to figure out, I'm debating whether I should trust StreamYard to get us reconnected back to our Facebook page, but no worries, we're still recording this. So we're going to keep going on, and we will also post a notice to everyone. Sorry, we got cut off. We'll try to figure out what happened, and still, again, we'll be posting the recorded clips later on. But let's continue on, Sasha. So we were busy. I believe you mentioned we were not gone. We did not forget about this. We were actually busy doing a couple other live streams that actually did work on Facebook before the outage, funnily enough. So while I pop those up, Sasha, why don't you talk us through what were the two kind of Facebook live sessions that we did as part of our promoting our faculty while I get them shared.
Right. So yeah, don't call this a comeback. We've been here for years. I wanted to just use that line forever. Yeah, so we've been doing Facebook Live with our faculty with BJM. So we did have those BJM Talks on the BJM Facebook page. And like you said, it worked quite well, actually, during or before the Facebook outage, the big Facebook outage of 2021. It feels like we're broadcasting through the apocalypse right now. So yeah, here, thanks, you brought up the first talk, current issues talk. Besides calling out, what could we have done or what could be done better to handle the COVID-19 situation? We talked about, well, how media in particular could handle COVID coverage, but also I think we talked about everything in that talk. I thought we started off by trying to talk about media and influence onto society, but eventually we talked about politics. We talked about everything in that talk, from different cultural standpoints, how different countries managed COVID and so on. I think that talk was quite interesting. It didn't go exactly down in a way that I would have expected it, but I did learn quite a lot from it. What was your take on our first talk?
I would say for the first session that we had, came in with, moderate expectations. I wouldn't say low expectations. I would say moderate expectations because I figured we have quite a bit of knowledge on media and all that. We are all following the COVID-19 pandemic situation and talking about how something that seems as simple as a vaccine rollout is not so simple actually in practice when you have millions of people all clamoring to get the vaccine. And I think one of the things that I asked during that session, which I found really interesting, was just asking our Thai colleagues, why is it that we have so many people queuing up for a vaccine that they technically don't have? They called it walk-in vaccine. But last I checked, if you're going to have a walk-in vaccine, you need to make sure that you have the vaccine to give to people to begin with. They should not be... there were two issues there. One was just 3 to 4 hours of waiting and the fact that there was no social distancing out there for some reason. And that was the two things that shocked me most was, okay, yes, you're wearing masks. But one of the key things that I keep mentioning to people is that, no, you can't just wear masks. You got to be distancing from other people because who knows, those kind of particles that come out of your mouth when talking, when you sneeze, they travel over distances and they get passed through cash. This is why you have to be pretty diligent about using the hand spray or the hand creams and all that to make sure that you're not getting it there. But that was kind of getting back on track. That was one of the things that was surprising to me was just, we are in one of the most connected countries, not just in Southeast Asia, but in the world. Everyone is on the internet. Everyone has access. I can't go to a coffee shop without seeing someone on their break or when there are no customers on their phone, watching a series or watching something. So it was just amazing to me that as well connected as we are, we don't seem to be very well efficient at giving this kind of information to the public, despite the fact that we have all these technologies. And I think that makes a great point that you've always mentioned, Sasha, is that technology doesn't make us better or smarter or better at, more efficient at doing all these things. In fact, technology has actually led to, and that was the other key point, was all the misinformation we're seeing right now is being shared on social media. Now people are getting arrested for basically just sharing something. They don't even post it maliciously, they're just sharing it and they're getting arrested. So there were, so many issues and interesting things. And even I believe, and you can correct me if I misremembered this, but many of our Thai colleagues were also surprised that these kind of issues are still happening. All these inefficiencies though, but I can't say that Thailand is any different because America, there are inefficiencies and still I would say the number of deaths is highest in the US, if I remember correctly. And still other countries in Europe, they're trying to reopen and then thinking, just kidding, we're not ready yet. So there are just so many things about, and I think that this is just a great example of how technology is not making things better. In fact, I would say it's made things a lot more chaotic, but I'm wondering what's your take kind of on this whole issue of technology and sharing and COVID and just trying to reopen. What's your feelings on this?
I mean, it's a huge topic, right? So it's hard to pinpoint it down to one issue, but there are just so many. But the main issue, like you mentioned, also for me, is the frustrating point is that in theory, technology should bring us closer together, should make sharing easier, should make knowledge sharing and whatnot. But apparently it's not working. And that's just ridiculous to me. It's now even if you get vaccines, like we got the 2 shots here right now, then if you want to go to Europe, to certain countries, don't even accept it. It's not they don't accept vaccines that are administered in Thailand, even though you have the AstraZeneca vaccine, which you can get in Europe too, but they don't accept it because it's been done in Thailand. And you're like, what? Like, how can you not clear that before? Why is there not a protocol that's like internationally accepted, for example? It shouldn't be that difficult for health ministers to say, hey, let's follow that protocol to make sure we're all on the same page, for example. So that's kind of infuriating that there is not any type of better communication there. And then also, of course, what you mentioned and also what we mentioned in our live talk or BJM, how is there not better communication towards the public? Because the public just hears like parts here, parts there, then the fake news, the false information, because they don't get the information that they're looking for. So they're desperate to consume any kind of information. Like, the government doesn't tell me what's up. Well, then I believe that weird blog that pops up on Facebook, because at least they tell me something. And that's so frustrating that the official bodies like health ministry, whatnot, if they would communicate better, I think people would not listen to those fake news. But because the communication is so bad, and not only in Thailand, in the US, in Germany, everywhere the same, right? If the communication wasn't that bad from the official sources, then people wouldn't be that open to listen to those weird conspiracy theory outlets. And I think that's a big problem that we're facing.
One of the great things that I think you would also be able to talk about is actually we talk about these things in JM200, our Intro to Communication class. And it's funny because, this year actually, students actually quite liked the topic, but in a couple other years, we have had questions from students asking us, why do we have to do this Intro to Comm class? Because they think it's easy. They think that, we're able to send messages really quickly and really fast. And I tell them all the time, if someone sees your message and doesn't like it, you can't then say, oh, well, I had a technical issue. Like, no one's going to buy that excuse from you. And yet still, even in this day and age, we have people who keep sending texts and messages and graphics that they think are going to be fine, but then turn out to be super controversial. And this is not just a great example of why we have to microanalyze images, graphics, advertisements, but also in terms of health communication like this. It's essential, but it's also very easy to get wrong and to cause mass panic, which is what we saw here and in many other countries. But I mean, what is the key thing that we have to take on? I think one of the key things is communication. You have to look at what you're sending first. You can't just look at the delivery mechanism. You got to look at what are you sending first and how are different people going to interpret your message. But
exactly.
And I think, Sasha, that's one thing I would like for you to elaborate on is why is this still so difficult? Like, we still have people who send stuff out and then they're all shocked and amazed at why is this so controversial? I just sent a message that's supposed to help. Why does everyone not like it? Why do we still have these issues of people sending out a message and then being surprised? Oh, wait, people didn't understand or misconstrued or distorted. Why do we have these issues, do you think, still? Even though we're 40 years of communication theory says this happens. But then why are we still kind of presenting this and this is still novel information? What do you think the issue is really?
I think the issue is what you actually mentioned already. It's that everybody thinks it's easy and I know what I mean, so the other person also knows what I mean. Like, you should just understand me because I said it, so you understand me. So I think we're not open-minded enough to see that other people have other points of view. Or I mean, how you learn it in JM200 and Intro to Communication, that different factors influence the way you understand a message, right? The way you grow up, like where you live, your parents, your friends, all those things influence how you understand messages in different ways. And I think that's crucial to actually understand that just because I say something and I know what I mean doesn't mean that the other person understands it in the same way. But I think maybe also because communication has become so much faster now that we don't have time to sit and think about a message anymore. We just shoot it because you want fast communication. You don't have time to think about it, read, think about an answer. No, you reply right away because that's just how you're, what you're used to right now. That's how it's supposed to be, right? You see, oh no, I read it. So he now sees that I read it. So I have to reply right away. And I think that's also a big problem, that like this immediate need of satisfaction of getting an answer or sending an answer right away, or not leaving anything on unread, is a big problem that influences communication. You're taking less time. You're not thinking about the receiver of our message. We just think about sending, and you better figure out what I mean. And I think that's a problem.
That's actually a great segue, because we had a similar issue with this fast send of communication. At least I did. So that leads us into our second talk, actually. So, Sasha, before I go into my whole, and I hope I don't rant about this, because actually I was kind of irritated. I'm a little bit better now, but I'm still kind of frustrated with what happened. But before that, please talk to us about what was the second kind of talk that we did that led to these issues of fast communication without necessarily paying attention to the full context of what was being shared. So what was our second topic?
I was already ready to get my popcorn and just listen to you ranting.
Not yet. I might get there, but first I got to make sure to share that screen so that they all know what we're going to be talking about, because visuals are important. Exactly, so we did have a second talk on media literacy. So Sasha, could you talk us through what was the inspiration behind our second talk that we did with our faculty?
Right. So it was just when the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan happened, and because we saw so many pieces of news and people just picking up headlines, and then also seeing that news agencies were just publishing headlines for clicks and so on. So we thought, hey, a talk on media literacy would make sense, just to say, hey, be careful with what you consume, make sure you understand what you're consuming, and don't just fall for clickbait headlines and so on. The idea was born because of the Afghanistan example, because it just happened. But of course, we then connected it to other crises before, crisis in Thailand, global crisis, and so on. We then heard also from our colleagues, of course, how this happened in different countries, and how different news outlets cover different issues, and how some companies try to go more for the clickbait, of course, others are more analytical. And so that's what we try to use to make a point of why media literacy is so important. And the fun thing is that we had some interaction then in the Facebook Live, which was good, of course, which we really appreciate, and thank you for the interaction. But some of the comments fell into what we just said in the comment first, think later kind of approach. And I think that's where you are chiming in now, because, it kind of like affected you way more than me.
Yeah, they were super happy actually with you. One of the hashtags during that exchange was "not a German prof." So I think that was very positive for you. But yeah, so let me kind of get into it, and Sasha can kind of talk about his kind of take, because he was there. He kind of had the whole conversation. So yeah, I'm going to first talk about what happened, very honestly, and without kind of blaming. And of course, I'm not going to name whoever did that, because that's not important. But I think that there is a very important lesson to be had here. So Sasha, make sure that I kind of got the facts right. I don't want to distort anything, because I know how that feels when people distort what you say. So basically what we were talking about, we were on the idea that, Afghanistan, it's 2021. We have heard about these issues since 2016, and I was saying to everyone, why is it that we have to rely on an international media system to talk about the issues in Afghanistan? Why didn't the local media in Afghanistan talk about these issues, highlight these issues, make sure that they were addressing these problems? And so then I was talking about the very issue that Ajahn Sasha was mentioning, this whole commodification of information, the fact that we have to pay for information, the fact that we have paywalls that say we have to pay a fee first. If we don't pay the fee, we'll be able to see 2 or 3 lines of that article, and then we'll not be able to read anything more from that article. So what I was thinking at that point in time was I was thinking to myself, how do we fund information? So we fund it through the public. So the public makes donations. That has been the normal way that was done. The other was, of course, by governments. And this is where we're going to have this kind of issue of what is public, what is government, what is business. But basically what I was trying to tell everyone was that we have to think about how we are supporting these news organizations. And I remember I mentioned that access to information, seeking out information, all this kind of information should be a service. Now, kind of what happened there was because I said service, and Sasha, maybe you can chime in here. When I said service, apparently there was some kind of misunderstanding. I think some people thought I was implying it was government service, but kind of tell me what you were thinking as I was kind of going through it, because I mentioned service as just kind of a taking off point. I wanted to hear more about everyone else's take on the service angle that I was mentioning, but you were one of the first who got a little bit concerned about where I was going with this response. So you can tell me, what were you thinking when I mentioned information being a service? What was the first thought that came in your mind?
I think we talked about like it being a public service or something like this. So I think I might just have jumped to conclusions, and I was like, oh, public service, I'm not sure, because then I was just taking the example from that we had in Germany, that like we have some public news channels there that are funded by your tax money, and then people aren't happy with this. And I was explaining that. But then actually, after I said that, you said, yeah, I understand, but that's not what I meant. And then you actually explained what you meant. And then I was like, oh, right, I didn't understand it that way. But now that you explain it, I understand it. And I think that's how communication is supposed to work, right? You don't understand it first, you ask, then you explain.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what I was thinking, was I was struggling to find the word. And of course, you and I both know we don't want to have dead space trying to figure out the right exact word. So the first word that came to my mind at that point in time was public service, because that's what I had been thinking about at the time. But of course, once you mentioned that, and you didn't even attack me for that point. You asked me actually to clarify my point, which I thought was fair enough. And it was at that point when you asked for clarity that I then realized, wait, a lot of people may assume that public is combined with government services, which, I mean, I understand that, because a lot of places, especially here, when you mention public service, it gets combined with government service because, and that's one other thing that I think we can talk about, this kind of melding or converging of these two terms, which is government service, public service. Many times government ends up giving these public services, so it ends up getting inappropriately sometimes combined together, which I wasn't quite aware of until I realized that, oh, wait, I'm in a country where there's very bad corruption. Government services are not what they should be. So I did clarify that, but before we go further with what happened in that conversation, and you mentioned Germany, so I think that might be interesting, is what is this kind of, how do we view government service, public service? Are they just combined together? How is it like in Germany?
Yeah, maybe seriously, it was also just a language barrier from my point of view. So that was just a connection I made right off the bat, like hearing public service. Now, upon clarification, upon then rethinking, still the first thing that comes to mind when you say public services, the government offers something. But there are also obviously non-governmental organizations that are also offering public services. It's just not what jumps to mind, but once you think about it, you're like, oh, no, actually, it's not only the government. There are lots of other service providers, organizations that offer public services that are definitely not the government. And that's important because also the point that you made then, you don't want to only rely on the government, obviously. And you can't only rely on the government. That's why there are third parties there that offer those services. And we do have them in Germany. We probably have some in Thailand. I'm trying to stall and think about it, but I'm not sure, to be honest. But there should. And that's also the point that you made then. You said there should be something besides the government that would provide those services.
Because I think that what we were trying to really get people to think more about is we do I would say nobody really does a great job of funding and financially supporting these organizations. I mean, what they're doing is basically what universities do in their research.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have a person wanting to do an article, they shouldn't do it for free. Like, if you want someone to actually do a news article that is worth reading, they have to do some careful analysis. They have to put some time and effort into putting out some polls, contacting people. You can only imagine how many hours it takes just to get an interview, schedule an interview. And then you have to worry about all these other kind of factors, as in getting those sound bites, editing the thing together. And we don't do a very good job of supporting these organizations. And I mentioned this very specifically, is that who is the ones who have to take on the financial burden every single time? It's you, it's me, it's private individuals that have to pay for all these subscriptions, which don't make much sense anymore because, okay, I could pay for that subscription, but then I can get the same information on Facebook. Someone could copy paste it and post it onto their own website or blog. So then it's like, okay, who was the one who last posted it? But at the end of the day, what I was saying was businesses should fund this. It shouldn't just be governments. Governments, and I mentioned this as well, governments have an inherent conflict of interest, especially in a kind of pseudo-democratic society. It's never a good idea to trust your government to deliver all the essential services, because that's when you have some of those issues, some of those concerns that were mentioned that I'll get more into in a little bit. But yeah, that is something that I think we still have to try to figure out, because businesses have the money, but are they expected to spend for it? Because if you look at a business, they're going to look at their expenditures, and if you're going to tack on like an information tax onto the businesses, are they going to pay for it? Probably not, because they're already looking at finding ways to get away from paying more taxes just to keep their expenses lower and their profits higher. But I feel like that is something that we have to talk about, because I just don't think it's fair that private individuals have to be the ones to pay for this information. Private individuals, if they're going to learn more about society and the world, information has to be made readily accessible to them. You can't just, tell them, oh yeah, you have to pay 100, 200 baht per month to support our business. And I feel like every organization, business, government, or otherwise, benefits from this kind of system here. But I asked the question, and I think that everyone was a little bit, it was complicated. And it's one that we kind of have a few solutions, but there's no easy answers, because the people who, I should say the entities that can support these news organizations don't necessarily want to pay for it at this point. But is there and I remember I did mention, and this was unfortunately mentioned, we need to think about the third way, which is not easy. But Sasha, I was just wondering, what can we do? And the other thought that I only offered because, Facebook is now the key advertiser, and the reason why broadcasters could afford to spend so much money on their news operations was because advertisers were giving them their money. But now advertisers have cut out the broadcasters, who are now the middlemen, who are needed, and they go straight to Facebook. But then we walk into this whole issue of Facebook and Twitter, YouTube, all of them starting to be woke. But before we go further, we should clarify what we mean by woke and what we are trying to discuss with regards to the woke movement, because I don't want anyone to misconstrue what we're talking about when we're talking about woke, because there are a lot of discussions now about that. But what is this woke movement that we're seeing, Sasha, that is kind of related to our reluctance to allow Facebook and YouTube and all these other social media platforms that have the advertising money that broadcasters used to have? Now they have the money and can support the news operations, but we're not super keen on that. So what is kind of the issue we're worried about there with that?
Yeah, I mean, lots of issues there, but I think the main issue is simply that it comes to a form of like censorship eventually. that those companies then that you're using to publish, consume content, that they have the power to censor news or pieces of content that they deem not fitting. I don't even know what's the right word, but like offensive. I don't know what's the guidelines within like Google, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, how they call it. But the issue at hand is you don't know what they're gonna censor or like what they're gonna let through. And I'm hesitating because there are a few examples in my head, but then they might be controversial. Like, for example, banning Donald Trump. And if I say that, I'm obviously not a Donald Trump fan. I never have, never will. But do you ban the one guy and then let that's the cliche example, but then you let the leaders from other countries that are clearly not democratic, give them the space to be on your social media platform. So where do you draw the line? And the problem is we don't know where the line is because the line is drawn like arbitrarily somewhere and no one really knows. I think that's a problem. And actually, we didn't plan this, but I actually wanted to share something with you, but maybe I can just share it here on our live stream. I have a podcast that I started, and like it's Germany for non-Germans. It's like 10 minutes of me explaining the German Day of Unification, for example. And I thought I'd give it a funny title, a German hello, which is Servus. And then, the derogatory term for Germans is crowd, right? It's what like many people use because of crowd and so on. So I thought I make fun of myself. Call it Servus crowd. Apple Podcast censors the word crowd. They go like, my podcast is called Servus K **** T. They censor the word crowd because they think it might be offensive. Oh my God. So that's what just came to my mind while we talk about wokeness. Apple Podcasts, super woke by censoring the word crowd, for example.
And it just gets to the point of where, are we getting a bit too worried about other people's feelings? Because, when we're talking about all these issues, LGBT issues have centered around using the proper pronouns. Twitter, Facebook, all these other social media platforms are now telling you not to use certain words because they have that derogatory use history. But then it comes to the point of where, I think, Sasha, you and I both knew this, like we are dry humor, sarcasm people. So we say things and we use words that we don't mean in all seriousness. But of course, if Facebook algorithms are just going to look at the word without looking at the whole context, then of course there's going to be no comprehension of it. And then we'll of course get a warning. You may have had this happen to you as well, other than using the word crowd. But that is, of course, an issue there that we have to consider as well. Because when we're thinking about all this, we're not kind of criticizing the woke movement. We are worried about the very fact that, well, we need to maintain freedom of speech, because freedom of speech really allows us to kind of have these hard conversations, and we can't have freedom of speech if people are going to get offended whenever we use an inappropriate word or inappropriate term, even like not even trying to use the word, but just trying to say we're discussing this controversial word and we can't say it because we'd get in trouble.
Yeah.
So America has had this tradition, of course, you can't say the N-word at all, like never. You say the N-word in any way, people are going to misconstrue it as you being insensitive to African Americans. Mm. And so we've had this whole tradition of kind of censoring and not allowing people to say certain things, but I've always erred on the side of let people say what they want. And I'm starting to think of just telling people, you got to grow a thick skin here. People are going to say what they want online, and you can't ban every single person for saying something that you find offensive or that you find disturbing, because we can't attach history to all these words. Because kraut, why did they say that kraut is not the right word? Because people have used it as a derogatory word to describe the Germans, that this came from World War II, back when all those controversial things happened, which was okay. But at the same time, we're so far beyond that now. we know that was not a proud moment in history for Germany, but like using the word now, I mean, it's the same thing with the N-word, same kind of history, because it's had such a long controversial history. Now people don't want to use the word, and they say you can't use the word. If you use the word, you're automatically insensitive, no matter what.
Unless you're African American, then you can use it for your own group. Meaning, if I tell Apple Podcasts that I'm German, maybe I can use the word crowd by myself.
Maybe you should try that, actually.
But just for that point, right, when I came to Thailand, what I realized back then, I met lots of people, lots of Thai people that were using the N-word actually without knowing that it's a bad term, because they see it on TV, they hear it in music videos. They thought like, hey, I'm just going to say it. And I'm like, what did you just say? But it's also something cultural, obviously. Just like, because we talked earlier about communication gone wrong and not understanding. Yeah, culture is a big influence on how you understand messaging, of course. So just to highlight that point once again. And also, of course, this cancel thing very often turns into like this group communication, this group movement, right? You want to be part of the in-group. You want to be part of the cancel group. Like, I want this guy canceled. Let's all come together. Yes, we achieved something. We got this guy canceled on Twitter. Woo. So that's like this group movement. And I think that's just something that we got to be careful of, because, and yes, it's exaggerated, but that's how we started in 1938 or whatever with a group movement, just saying, right? So this can go really wrong. And we've seen it in America, like the storming the Capitol, that went wrong too. And it was also probably just an idea first, like, hey, would be cool if we would do that, right? Let's do it. And then, hey, you're part of this in-group and you can't stop anymore. So I think that's also something every woke warrior should be aware of, that not every battle you can fight is a battle you should fight.
So I'm sharing this.
Oh yeah, so that's Apple censoring me. Spotify does not censor, by the way, so it's really just on Apple.
So literally, like, I noticed there, though, you had the text underneath. The text underneath is fine, but you...
Yeah, exactly.
And it's in your picture, so I assume they can't detect the text in your picture either.
Exactly. So it's
yeah.
really...
Interesting times. So That's how algorithms work, everyone. If you put it in a picture, they won't notice unless someone reports you. Put it in the text, though, the algorithm will pick that up. So I don't know, maybe you just put it all in the image, Sasha,
put
and you'll get around it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Indeed. So that is an interesting take there. So I was just kind of thinking, so what happened? And I mean, that was a very long diatribe from where we went, but kind of getting back to kind of the issue there. So here's what ended up happening. So kind of what happened, and let me just kind of prepare a graphic here. After our second... All right, I'm getting the graphic up so everyone sees it. So after our second BJM live stream, I mean, I was logging off. I was kind of looking at the engagement to our live stream. And then I saw a few comments that were in Thai. There was one particular comment that just came up in my feed. So just full disclosure, I was not kind of stalking anyone. This just randomly popped up in my feed. So of course, from my view, because it was in Thai, it was Thai, Thai, Thai. Then I saw the words public service. Then I saw the words government service. And then I remember, who was the person who mentioned these two words during their talk? Of course, it was me. So of course, I then got curious, and then I entered into Google Translate, and then I realized the person said in particular, I can't believe a lecturer from a journalism faculty said that basically public service should be controlled by government, something along those lines there, which I was thinking to myself at that point in time, wait, I didn't say that. Ajahn Sasha clarified his take. He knows I didn't say that. So then, of course, I shared it to my group and I said, you know, did I say this? because I went back and looked at the recording, just that part, and I remember I didn't actually say that. But of course, I asked the group later on, did I actually say this? And of course, John, Sasha included, said, no, that wasn't what I said. And of course, I don't like being active on Facebook at all. I don't like having all of my kind of digital artifacts being collected and then stored somewhere, so I never comment. But in this case, I felt like I had to, because what was happening was that I was being presented as someone who is for government censorship and for control, and I basically said, you know, should really tag me, because I would have gladly clarified my point, but of course the people decided to be coy. The hashtag, as I mentioned before, came up, not a German prof, and I was just thinking to myself,
yes.
I know who you're talking about, and I know definitely which professors you're talking about, and then I just ended up commenting to this particular individual, you know, I'm not afraid and I'm not ashamed of what I said, so if you want to have me clarify and talk about it more, I can, but tag me. And I remember the main thing that I was really frustrated about was it wasn't just fast communication, it was the fact that she tried to kind of post it without me seeing it. And of course I saw it because, of course, it came up in my feed. Because again, that's how feeds work. When you post something and then you're friends with someone, everyone's going to see it. And in this case, I was friends with this particular individual and I saw what they posted. So it was one of those kind of situations where I feel like I had to respond to it on Facebook because I couldn't allow kind of this kind of miscommunication to happen. And I mean, I was able to explain my whole thing, but it just was, I would say, for lack of a better term, I think that this incident should never have happened. And I think if anyone wants to talk about something that I said that was potentially offensive, tag me. I don't mind. Like, I'm not like some of these other politicians who try to hide or censor something. Like, I was very forthcoming and had a conversation with it. But I mean, it was just not just the fast communication in this case, but the fact that they tried to have this conversation without tagging me so that I had no kind of recourse to reply to that whole conversation, because they were all debating about what we're just talking about. So that was the good part. The one unfortunate part was that they were debating about something that I didn't say. And that is probably the one thing that kind of irritates me most, because this is not the first time that I've been misquoted or misconstrued or distorted in that way. But I mean, at least we did have the recording. So that was good. But that was kind of something that I think you and I both need to talk about more, is just, I mean, we're in the public eye. We don't mind being in the public eye. You have your podcast and you do it quite frequently. And I mean, anyone's going to be able to see it, but we're not against talking more about these things because we believe it. We're not going to back away from something just because we said something. But Sasha, what was kind of your whole reflection on this whole experience of not only the fast communication, but also the not including someone who said something controversial and just having a conversation about them quite publicly? So I could see their conversation, but I wasn't a part of it. So that was an issue for me. Two things.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I mean, first of all, I do appreciate that A, people listen, and B, people talk about it. So that's a good thing. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate people having opinions. That's also no problem. But like you said, if you have an issue with what either of us is saying, tell us. I mean, we're happy to communicate. We're doing communication for a living, basically. So if you don't agree with something, sure, let's talk about it. No problem at all. But like just kind of behind the back and trying to get one over that person and making maybe fun of that person in like a smart, or do you feel that it's smart way, that's just not cool, because what does that bring you? I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish there besides just making fun of that person. Like, if you're really concerned about what you said, then that person is like, hey, I disagree with you because, and then you can start a conversation, and certainly something that everybody is happy to do. So I appreciate listening. I appreciate thinking about it. I appreciate having an opinion, but don't try to do like behind the back, because like, why? I don't see the benefit. Like, just go straight ahead. Like, hey, you said this, I disagree because, and then you can have like, you can clarify it, you can debate it, you can do anything that makes a real communication a communication. So like 2/3 of what happened, I thought is good, listening, thinking about it. 1/3, and that's unfortunately the part that now outweighs the rest, is like the way it was handled, and that was just not smart. But the thing is, I think this can also be a learning. So learning from it, seeing, hey, okay, I didn't handle it the best way possible. Next time, if I feel like it, I'm just straight up say, hey, Ajahn Ray, I disagree with what you're saying because I think it's the case. So what's up? What do you think? And if that's a learning that we take from this, then I think it can still be a good thing.
All right. And one other thing that was mentioned after our second live stream was a comment that said we were a bit too dry. The topic was not lively enough, needed to be more spicy, needed to be more moist. I don't know, many different words there, that it needs to be just more interesting. I wasn't sure what this particular individual was trying to say, but I think that there has to be kind of something clarified, is that, do we have things that we can say? Can we say things in a more colorful way? Yes, but Sasha, what is the main issue that we are worried about when we're trying to talk about Thai affairs and things that are related to the context that we're in right now? What is the kind of thing that is always rolling around in the back of our minds whenever we do these live streams?
I hope we don't get canceled.
Well, we should talk about it because we're talking about things in the open, confronting things head on. I think it's the key theme for our catch up now.
Yeah.
And I think that it also will clarify why we are not as spicy as some people would want us to be, because there is a reason for that. So what is it, Sasha?
Yeah, there are several reasons for it. Like, one being the channel that we're on is obviously not the most spicy channel ever. But I think that just comes with, the affiliation there. Secondly, we're not doing it for the clicks or just for the views. We actually want people to understand what we're saying. So we're trying to be more political rather than clickbaity. For clickbaity stuff, you follow this here, not the BJM live stream. And I think our target or our goal is just a little bit different. We're not going for the most spicy and controversial content. We're trying to, like I said earlier, being more analytical and trying to actually provide something beneficial that makes people maybe think and hopefully also learn. And also we're trying to be inclusive. So if you're also seeing like who we're doing this with, we're trying to be more inclusive, trying to have everybody feel comfortable there. And we're not trying to offend any of those other lecturers that are joining us, which might happen like when we do it in a setting like this right now, and we are like spitballing back and forth and we're being sarcastic and so on. This might be something that wouldn't be something that everybody appreciates that would join us on the other channel. So I think that's something that's always in the back of our heads. Of course, if you say something that's too controversial, it's going to reflect onto the channel that we're on. And of course, we're a bit aware of this as well, I believe.
We're also guests here. And here's the key thing, and here's the key rule that Ajahn Sasha follows, and this is also the same rule that I follow. If it's about America, I will go full blast, 100%. I don't mind criticizing my own country. And I'm sure Sasha would agree for Germany, because those are our home countries. We were born and raised there. We know all the issues there. We can tune into the news articles and see what is happening there. So that is where we're probably going to be at our spiciest. But if you're expecting us to take that level of spice and then talk about Thailand, there are a couple different issues. And Sasha can also mention that. Number one, we don't have full information. We have the information from Bangkok Post, Coconuts Bangkok, which I'm sure, Sasha, some of your students have also mentioned, don't use coconuts. I'm sure that some of us get lectured about the information sources we use to get into like this kind of Thai news and information. And when we are not sure about the information, we don't want to criticize the Thai culture and the Thai government. Like we talk about, and that is the key theme that we have for our live streams always, is we ask our Thai colleagues to tell us what is going on. Is this a proper way to interpret what is happening within the country? And that's perfectly acceptable. And I would say much more appropriate than us making a bunch of kind of lively comments that are being anti-government or all that, which, might get us a very, very big kind of audience, especially with the protesters. But again, we're not about that, because Sasha would agree with this because he comes from the media advocacy angle. I agree with this as well because I come from the development angle. We just want to see Thailand develop in a way that is fair and equitable for all. And we don't do that by making controversial comments to try to inflame or kind of instigate one particular party or another. You may call this not spicy, you may call this not interesting, but it's not our place to make those kind of spicy comments about the country here. Because ultimately, Sasha, can you vote for anything here in Thailand?
No, we can't. And we might get clicks for being spicy once, but we also get a one-way ticket out of the country. So, that
is the one thing I would like to clarify about our spiciness. With regards to being spicy, and I'm going to kind of put this out here. With regards to being spicy, we're going to be spicy about certain topics. We're not going to be spicy about every single topic, especially if it comes down to kind of sensitive issues with regards to Thai governments and COVID issues, because it's not our place. It's really not our place. Our place is to help people think. Our place is to help our students think about how to improve things within their country. It is not our place, however, to kind of get more people to view our channel by saying very many controversial things, swear words. So we will try to engage, but in terms of, do you want us to say things that are taking a side? And that's the one other thing that Ajahn Sasha and I will not do. We won't take sides here, okay? Is there merit behind? Now, I will preface this by saying, is there merit behind what the protesters are doing? I would say, yeah, there's some. Some things have to be better. Does that mean you have to destroy a whole government system and structure? No. If you want to know what happens when you decide you're going to completely destroy a government and set up a whole new one, look to Afghanistan and their failed democracy project. It's not that easy. I will say this, though. It's easier to destroy rather than build and improve. And the shaky infrastructure that we have now, I would rather keep that than to just destroy the whole thing and hope that we can build something even better on top of it, because it's not that easy. Africa has been trying to do it. The Middle East has been trying to do it. Parts of Asia have been trying to do it. It's not how good governance is. And when you destroy, it takes 10 or 15 years, no matter what you do, to build back up. And I believe, like, even other countries, Singapore comes to mind. They did not destroy. They looked at, look, this is where we are now. This is where we have to go next. And we have to get the collaboration of everyone else. And that is one other key thing that I think is interesting, Sasha, just lack of collaboration. Yeah. I don't know if you're seeing it, just everyone's having their say, everyone's saying their spicy comments, but are they getting people to collaborate? No. So what is this issue? Why is it that collaboration, we talk about it as a theory, we talk about it a lot with our students, but yet everywhere we see, there's just a lack of collaboration that is happening around the globe. So what are we seeing here? Is it true that there might be better collaboration in some places and not others? But just from my view, it just doesn't seem collaboration is really working. What's your take on this collaboration issue?
That's actually one of the, I know, if we stick to the Thai theme right now, to looking at the protests and so on. And I do sympathize with the young people that feel like they need some change. And so I understand where they're coming from. But what you're saying, the collaboration now within the young people group, student group that is apparently driving the protest, now you have different groups in there that are not seeing eye to eye. So if already in that group, if you already have like different factions in this group that are not seeing eye to eye, how do you want to bring about change that actually changes, reforms the whole country if you can't even collaborate on that small level? Right? So that's the first time when I was made aware of those collaboration issues, it was a bit disheartening because, quite frankly, in the beginning, when I tried to follow the developments and so on, I might have been blinded by our all excited and so I'm like, hey, cool, look at how excited they are to actually do something and to stand up for something. I'm like, hey, that feels like they can do whatever. But then seeing how they are not able to collaborate on any level, apparently, was unfortunately a bit disheartening and a bit saddening to see. And if it doesn't work on a small level, how should it work on a bigger level, right? So that's a big issue. And I mean, like you said before, you see it everywhere, not only here in Thailand, but we're talking about Thailand right now, but you see it in the US. They're not able to collaborate. In Germany, we're not able to collaborate. Right now, last Sunday, there were elections in Germany. We still don't have a government a week later because they're not able to figure out who goes into a coalition with whom, also not able to collaborate. So collaboration issues everywhere because what I mentioned earlier, like this group thing is, I don't want to give you more space than you really need to survive because this group and should take everything. So this collaboration issue is, I think, a global issue right now.
And I feel like one of the things that I was just curious about, and I want to get your take on it, is just it feels like everyone has the answer, the one perfect answer in their heads. And when someone says you got to adjust your solution, or I should say answer, I also mean solution in this case. Whenever people see that they have to amend or revise or refine their solution in some way or another, they claim that it is a complete kind of corruption of their original idea. And I feel like I've seen it in the US. They try to get a law that is nonpartisan, but then when it gets revised even slightly by the other side, their whole claims to be a corruption of the whole bill, and now they can't use the bill anymore because they changed one thing in there, as opposed to just trying to get the bill passed to see if it actually works. But I mean, that's one thing that I think, and this is a great segue to our last segment in which we're talking about education. Do we fixate too much on having these correct answers? Because, okay, we have certain contexts where there is a clear answer, like when you're doing finance, when you're doing maths, when you're doing physics, when you're doing these kind of equations. Yes, there is one particular answer, but when you go into social sciences and into governments, there are many different ways to govern a country in an effective manner. And one of the things that we have to unfortunately talk about, again, we did talk about this a little bit in our live streams, is the fact that the most stable countries in the world, China, Singapore, are not full democracies. And the countries that have so many issues that you just mentioned, Germany as another example, if you cannot have people respect the elections, you have no democracy. And that is a big problem. Protest has always been a byproduct of most democracies because people feel like, oh yeah, we can do this because it's our right to protest. It's our right to complain about things. It's our right to say what we want. But at the end of the day, when it comes to governance, are we too fixated on having the best answer? Like I always hear people, China is now implied that their system is best and everyone should copy them. Before that, it was America saying democracy is best. Everyone should copy them. And I was just thinking to myself in terms of this development issue, this ain't a math problem. Like if it's a math problem, it has like 100 different variables and you can't have the right answer there. So do you think that there's somewhat of an obsession with just one answer and one answer only? And if the answer gets or solution gets kind of changed in any way, suddenly it's no good? Do you feel like that's part of this issue behind the collaboration?
Mm-hmm. That's actually, I think, a very good point. Yeah, I think that's the problem. The problem is that that solution that everybody wants, they don't come to like the solution by analyzing the problem and then thinking about it. They're thinking about, what do I want? What do I want the solution to be? Not what should it be or what could it be. It's like, what want I the solution to be? And I think that that's the big issue. I forgot who it said. I watched, I listened to a podcast by Lex Friedman, I guess like a MIT scientist on AI and stuff. And he interviewed some of his contemporaries. And this guy said he's happy when he's wrong. And he's like, why are you happy when you're wrong? He's like, because that means I'm going to learn something. If I'm not right, it means I will learn something new. And I'm like, that's an awesome mindset. Of course, it was an academic who said it. That's a great mindset, because I think the problem is everybody wants to be right. And if it's not my solution, means I'm wrong. I didn't accomplish something or whatever. So I think that's a big issue, that we want to be right for the sake of being right, and not think about what would be best for whatever solution we're looking for. And I think that's a big issue these days, because if you're right, you can post about it on social media, like, I was right, I did it, that's my solution, kind of thing. And I think that's a big issue, yeah.
I mean, that is one thing. And that is something that even I'm trying to think about, is that I don't mind being wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, as part of like what I'm teaching to the students now is just, when you have a hypothesis, what you got to do when you have a hypothesis, and a hypothesis is an educated guess based on what you've read and researched, as you just mentioned, is you can't go in there trying to prove your hypothesis is right. You can't go in there trying to prove that your argument is right, because what happens in many cases where there is corruption or where there is kind of a tainted kind of report is because, as you said, people are trying to prove that they were right and that this works. And we got to understand here, and this is something that we've talked about a lot as a faculty, actually, is the importance of showing that, we get stuff wrong on occasion. I don't think any of us, any of the faculty members at Thomas Hall University, none of them have ever struck me as people who always had to be right. And I think that is an important mindset that has to be emphasized, is that, look, if you tried something and it didn't quite work, that's fine. But you got to, at the end of the day, if it didn't work, you got to admit and say, look, I was wrong. This is why I was wrong. But most importantly, the next step is saying how you're going to do better in the future, which is not always something that is always done. It's always they hide it or they take responsibility, but then we don't know if someone is actually going to improve or show that they have learned something from their experience. Because I'm sure you felt this way. I feel this way as an educator as well. When a student tells me that they made a mistake and they're going to be better, I always take that with a grain of salt, to be honest, because I'm thinking to myself, yeah, okay, but many times when a student apologizes for making a mistake, it's not their first mistake. It's their third or fourth or fifth mistake that they have made in my classes over the past 2 or 3 years. So I think that there is a fine line there in terms of, yeah, we want you to admit being wrong, but don't just say, I'm wrong, I did something wrong, and then leave it at that. Because what I've now tried to pressure people to say now is, okay, I acknowledge you did the first step, saying you were wrong, but what you're going to do in the future, because I feel like this all ties back to what we were talking about. Like, saying you're wrong is one thing, but if you just say you're wrong and then don't talk at all about how you're going to improve or be better, like, it's like, what's the point? Like, you're not going to improve in any way. So how do we go about that? Making sure that people don't just apologize and say they were wrong, but going that next step and thinking about, this is what I messed up, this is what I'm going to do better if I get into that situation. How do we educate that? This is not something that always gets educated. People think beating someone with a stick is a great way to reinforce, don't make that mistake again. But I feel like there's a more subtle approach to getting people to not just admit they're wrong, but also think about how they're going to be better, which is ultimately the most important thing, not just apologizing all the time. So what's your take on how do we educate this? Because this is not something I see many people talk about. It's either be perfect or admit your mistake, but we never go to the aspect of learning from your mistakes.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, because like you said, like it's one thing to apologize, and it's like many people think like as soon as they apologize, it's all good. It's like, no, like I said, it's the first step, and appreciate it that you understand that you made a mistake, but what's next? And I think lighting that fire to I know, this curiosity to wanting to become better is what educators should be doing, should try to do. The problem here is, though, that there is, I believe, not one formula that fits all, right? So, I mean, the educator then has to figure out, how do I light this fire amongst my students? And even if you, let's say you have a class of 40 people, it's not going to be the same for all those 40 people. So it really takes work to understand your students, to know what mistakes they did, why did they do those mistakes, and then how do you push them towards the right direction to make them not give up and say, my bad, I'm wrong, damn it, tell me the solution. No, you say, I want you to find the solution by yourself. And I think there's a lot of work involved, and that's why maybe this road is the road less traveled in terms of where educators are going, just because it's a rocky road, so to speak. But obviously, as we know, let's stick with the metaphor, those rocky roads very often lead you to greener pastures eventually, because it's the road less traveled. And I stop with those cliches right now, but it's simply true, right? So you need to find a way to light that fire, to this curiosity amongst the students. And if you succeed doing this, then they hopefully will say, hey, okay, I get it, I'm wrong right now, I want to be better, help me to find a way, but I'm not just the answer. And I think finding a way to do this is what it's all about. But there is no clear-cut answer. It's lots of trial and error, I believe, trying new things, talking with other educators, what they are doing, like what we've been doing, for example, talking with our colleagues, sharing sessions and so on, to see what works for you, what works for me, what didn't, what kind of students do I have, how do I understand my students, and do I have enough time to invest is also a big question, I believe. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we have to kind of embed more in our education, because I think a lot of the times we're looking for right or wrong answers. For me in particular, as I've taught more, I've learned to think more about, okay, is it a right or wrong answer? That's the first level. But then the second level is, okay, can I understand where the student is coming from? Can I see that they are actually trying to think about and apply what they're learning in a novel way? Have they showed that they paid attention enough that they get at least most of the key points correct, but also take it in an interesting direction? Because I've tried to get out of this whole mode of just saying it's absolutely right or absolutely wrong, because that mindset, I think, leads students down a not so good path of thinking that, oh, there is a definite right answer and there's a definite wrong answer. But we all know life, you don't get completely right or wrong answers. You make choices, you make decisions that are not right or wrong, you just made them. And if we keep classifying things into right or wrong, it's just going to be very hard for us to be able to think laterally, think non-linearly, and just work at things on a much different level. And with complex, and the other key point I'm going to mention is, with complex issues, right and wrong are not very good. They're actually the worst kind of mindset to go into when you're trying to solve a complex problem that has multiple solutions. It's not one way is going to work best and another way. There are trade-offs. And that's the other thing that I think you mentioned is important, that sometimes doesn't get emphasized, is people got to know that there is no absolutely perfect solution, like with a math problem. You have great things about one solution, but you have bad things about that solution, and vice versa for any other kind of solutions you come up with. Same with our kind of teaching activities as well. If you go with active learning, students will like it, but it's much more exhausting. You go with passive learning. I know nobody wants to admit this, but passive learning is easier because you just got to give the lecture, give the exam. After that, you're done. It's easy. But everyone, especially nowadays, this generation of students, they hate passive learning. yeah, they're going to kind of sit there and pay attention somewhat for the first 5-10 minutes, but are they still going to be there? Probably not. So that's kind of the other issue that we've always got to be talking about. But again, we're very good at segues, as you can see on this show here. So we're going to talk about one other thing that we've been working on, which is the ITS, Stanford ITS Innovative Teaching Scholars Program that we've been working on. So I'm going to get the graphic up.
Drum roll.
Drum roll, saving, and now posting it. So we're going to finish our session, which has already gone for an hour and a half, and we're now up to 3 viewers and 3 likes. I think that's our new record for now.
We're famous. I quit my job.
Yeah, maybe not quite yet.
Oh, okay.
But anyways, we're going to talk more about something that we're going to be sharing a lot more about in the near future. This is the Stanford ITS program. So, Sasha, can you talk through while I share some more information and a kind website about the Stanford ITS program? What are we focusing on with that?
Again, as I always start my answers with this, lots of things. Well, the name suggested innovative teaching scholars. So it tries to focus on innovative teaching methods, tries to show us, the participants, how to maybe broaden your horizon in regards to your teaching approaches, find better ways to engage students and so on. It's been going on for a while. I think we started last year, right? It's been a while. We started way back as participants of the program. It was actually quite intense to get into this program. When you suggested for me to apply there with you, I was like, yeah, sure. And then I read the requirements and that you have to submit kind of an essay there. Like, what's happening right now? I had to write an essay like, why do I want to join this program and what do I expect and so on. Luckily got accepted. It was a nice experience to then on a monthly, I think, basis our meetings, right? Learning about how to improve your teaching, trying different things in your classes, giving us experiments to do in our classes. The students that had classes with us over the past year probably realized, hey, they're changing things in their classes. They're trying different things right now. So you were our guinea pigs, if you haven't realized already. So you're our guinea pigs when we try to improve our teaching methods. And this is still ongoing. So now, way later, like 2 semesters later, basically, I think, the driver's seat as kind of facilitators, moderators of a cohort right now, where we're trying to also find out how to lead our colleagues towards hopefully more creative ideas in regards to their teaching and teaching methods. I think overall it's pretty exciting, and I'm pretty happy that you suggested that to apply for that, because I learned a lot, made lots of interesting connections, but especially the learning that I took from that and motivation to try new things has been really beneficial to my classes, I think.
Yeah, and also quick note, we're going to have more of our guests from this program on our show. So we were trying to get that settled up, but of course we had a couple other live streams that we had to do. But the whole plan is that you're going to be introduced to these innovative teaching scholars very shortly. So we just want to introduce the program first, because we are going to be doing a lot more with this on social media and a couple other different events that we're going to be doing. So this is kind of our first intro to this whole program. So one other fun fact, Sasha, was that I couldn't apply without you. Okay, we had to apply in pairs. And yeah, if you were not accepted, I probably would not have been accepted either. So I'm quite happy that we both got in. But yeah, I think that is one interesting thing about the entrance. And that was actually, in a way, it was kind of difficult, but in a way it was also good, because it really showed a lot of rigor. Like we had to write quite a few detailed responses. And that was one of the first things that kind of drew me to this program, was just the kind of answers they were asking weren't just to be difficult, actually. They were actually geared towards talking about our teaching and helping us think about, what we are doing right now. And then by the time we went through the sessions, I really started to reflect more on, I had a lot of assumptions, I'm sure you did as well, about certain kind of aspects of our teaching that we never considered before.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is really valuable because I think that sometimes we're on rails. We think that education is best being delivered one way. You have an expert, and that expert shares their knowledge, and everyone takes notes, and then that's the best way for people to learn. But that leads back to kind of our issue about complex issues. Even if you have a case study, and you would agree with this, John, Sasha, is that case studies, you can't just free copy paste it into real life context and situations. You've got to find ways to kind of make students look at things from a realistic angle that doesn't have a clear right or wrong answer and might have 4 or 5 interesting answers there. And that is something that I think is something that I think we were really looking forward to in terms of we're just getting started, and we're really looking forward to doing more and experimenting more. So Sasha, what are some things that you experimented with thanks to this Stanford ITS program? What was one thing that you had never thought about until you kind of did this whole program here?
Again, many things, luckily. Still very thankful for this. So for example, maybe the one class that you're thinking about it that I shared with you and that my students got mad at is when I took them out of the classroom, because one of the levers that we talked about was the space in which students study. And it was when we were still able to go to campus. Luckily, back then, I barely remember how it looked like. So I didn't come to class. I set up like an initial question on the slides, and then I had some QR codes placed around our faculty on campus where students then could basically chase tips, learn about the thing, apply what they learned for their final presentation on the day. So they had 3 hours, the length of a class, to then find different tips, different sources, understand those sources, and then create something based on what they learned over those 2.5 hours, and then present it at the very end of the class, which was kind of fun because usually the students rely on me being there telling them what to do, but this time I wasn't there, so they had to figure out what to do by themselves, which then also led to like more peer learning, of course, which was also interesting. So I found this a very interesting experiment, lots of fun for me to see how students behave. Lots of learning for me also, because I can see how long it took the students to get started, like where they struggled. So I know, okay, at this part of the class they struggled, so I have to change that to make it better or more understandable, for example. So I took lots of learning away from this. I also had one class that in this past semester completely on social media, for example, because the class was new media studies. So I'm like, okay, let's not go on MS Teams where you have classes all day long, every single day. So I had a class completely on social media, on TikTok and on Instagram, for example, which I might not do again, but it was just an interesting experiment to get students out of their space that they're usually occupying. Because if you're in the same space all the time, you expect that every class is the same. And as soon as something is different, you like more focused, I think. So this was something that I learned that I found very interesting.
Yeah, and for me, it was a similar experience because I took probably, and I did this deliberately, by the way, I took the driest, most kind of intellectually challenging class that I have that doesn't necessarily have a fun angle to it, but an important angle to it, communication research methods, and tried to actually create what I called an exhibition or fair for students to share their research results. So I ended up changing the classroom like I'd always been in a lecture hall. For that one, I spent almost an hour rearranging the classroom for the students and then just having them set up QR codes, sharing their slides, talking with each other. And literally, I just, as you mentioned, you didn't do much, I didn't do much either. And it was actually something that was emphasized by our facilitators, was that teaching doesn't mean you have to do a whole lot during the class time. It doesn't mean you do nothing, of course, because as you know, that was, I would say, 4 or 5 hours of extra preparation. Same for me. 4 or 5 hours of extra preparation. But when it came time to it, I noticed, yeah, it actually really worked. So the extra preparation time led to students not just sitting around, but actually being active and giving knowledge to each other. And that's kind of another key point that we have to mention, is just co-creating knowledge is something that we're focusing on, and especially kind of peer learning and all that. But that leads to an interesting point I want to mention, because I know Sasha has done something with this. This is what we call peer learning. I think Sasha has been experimenting with it, so I just want to kind of have this last point about peer learning. So for those, especially here, peer learning is not probably something that we talk a lot about, but is potentially a very powerful education method. So Sasha, can you walk them through what is peer learning and how does it work?
How does it work? You pray? No, I'm kidding. So peer learning basically refers to that peers teach each other. So students would teach each other. So yeah, I tried it in a few classes now. Actually, also I did it today, like a little bit at least. The thing is, it relies on students being active. So let's, as an example, let's paint a picture. So I have a class and say, okay, I want to discuss certain topics today, but I'm not going to tell you what it's about. Group A, you figure out what topic A is about. Group B, you figure out what topic B is about. And then later down the road, you just teach each other. So that's like a basic setup. Of course, that goes more into preparation. Like you, as the facilitator, you need to make sure that they are on the right track, that they're finding the right sources, that they understand the sources in the right way. So you're still there to feedback, of course, to help in case someone doesn't understand the source, someone has a question. So then you help understanding it. But still, in the end, they end up basically teaching each other. And of course, you're there and you listen in, you're like, okay, let me see if you got that right. But what it leads to is usually, and you know, if you teach something, you end up understanding it better, because if you want to explain something, you need to really understand it. Otherwise, you cannot explain it, right? So that's the benefits of this peer learning, is that you don't only sit back and relax as the teacher, because that's really not the case. It looks like it, but actually the preparation is way more, and you have to actively listen, feedback, and so on. But the students that teach each other just learn much more, because A, they make sure that they know what they're teaching, and B, they actively listen to their peers. So they don't just listen to a teacher because a student listen to a teacher like, oh, whatever, the teacher, yeah, blah, blah. But when they have to listen to their peer, they're like, okay, that's my friend right now. I'm going to listen to what they have to say. So that's just the benefits of peer learning. But yeah, so it takes lots of preparation and lots of engagement. You have to keep the groups engaged. If you give them too many things to do, a topic that's too big, too abstract maybe, then they get stuck. If it's too easy, then they're like done in 5 minutes. So you need to really find the right balance. And I think that's this balancing act is the difficult part, but again, totally worth it if it pays off.
So to kind of reemphasize and be on this track of we're not afraid of talking about our mistakes, as well as the key things that have worked out. Tell me, what is some good things that you've found out from this peer learning, and what are some things that I wouldn't say were mistakes, but I will say are some areas to keep in mind? Because what I want to do with all of our topics now, since that was the key theme, is making sure that people understand there is no one perfect way of doing something. That's kind of the biggest problem that I think we have now, is everyone thinks their way is perfect. If there's another way, they don't like it. But I think that peer learning, from what you just described, sounds really great, really perfect. Like, who wouldn't like peer learning? But as you mentioned, there are things that you have to bear in mind, and some things that are trade-offs, for lack of a better term, in terms of how peer learning really has to work in order for it to be truly effective. Because as we all know, teaching is not just about being fun, it's about also making sure that there are good outcomes and the students come out of it thinking, yes, I know exactly what I was supposed to learn from this. But that might not always be the case. So from what you've seen so far, what are some of the good things about peer learning? But more importantly, what are some of the things that you maybe didn't think about before, but now you're thinking a lot more about because of your experiences with peer learning?
Right. Good question. So I think the pros and cons go actually hand in hand, because some of the positive surprises have been that student groups, when I assigned them to do something, that they just went for it. They just went way further down the rabbit hole in regards to the topic than I expected them to go. So they're like, hey, we're really interested right now. We want to know more. We do more. We find more examples, case studies. We create our own mock-up right now. They went all out to present their topic in the best possible way. And I was like, wow, that's just awesome. I did not expect that. And so that's something positive that happened there, because they had the freedom. I didn't force them into anything. I said like, hey, any way you want to present the topic, go for it. It's up to you. And they went all out. They designed stuff, made an infographic, had some interaction there. Awesome. But in the same hand, like the same freedom that I gave this group and it worked well, another group was like, we're not that motivated. That topic isn't really for us. And then they didn't do much. They just answered with like some questions and this is this and that's the definition and finish. And that's then the issue. Yeah, if you give them freedom, this can go one way or the other. I learned from this that, well, just giving them complete free rein might not be the best idea. And that might not be the student mistake. It was my mistake, because I need to be there to guide a little bit more. Because I understand it's easy to get lost. So if you just have a very broad topic to work with, for example, some go everywhere and try to find as much info about just anything, but some might be overwhelmed. And so then my learning was, okay, to avoid overwhelming students with like a very broad topic, I should be there to guide them a little bit more and not just be like, go and wait. So my learning is some guidance needs to be there also during peer learning. I had some students telling me that the instructions, like this open instructions, like, hey, your topic is, figure it out, is too confusing. What am I supposed to figure out? What's my end goal? So I realized, okay, I need to make this a little bit more clear. Your goal is to educate your contemporaries, your peers, and in the end, they should be able to answer this or that, this question, for example. To make it a bit more specific, then it's easier to work towards a goal. So those are some learnings that I took from that, and I'm very grateful for that. Also, I'm grateful for the feedback, so I appreciate that as well. But those pros and cons, they go hand in hand. And like I said earlier, this balancing act is the exhausting part. But again, if then the positives outweigh the negatives, it's totally worth it, I believe.
So we did have 4 viewers. Well, we had 5 viewers. We are now down to 4. But if you are viewing and you've been staying with us, feel free to leave a comment. I will also be happy to share your comment, whatever it is. Because we are now at apparently a record number. I think our last one was only at 3. We end up getting to 5, so we're getting somewhere. That's good.
Almost.
But anyways, yes, almost by our low metrics. But we're getting there. Still a work in progress. But anyway, that kind of reminds me of that balancing act that you just mentioned is something that I also think a lot about in terms of my teaching. So I do a lot of videos now. So I have students post videos, but what I'm now trying to do is I'm trying to use the videos as a stimulant to further discussion, because as you know, when people mention video, they just think post the video, done with that, go on to the next thing. But then I was thinking to myself, kind of on the basis of what you were mentioning about peer learning, which is they need to learn from each other. I've been trying to focus on getting the students to not just post videos, but also getting students to actually comment and discuss things that they cover in their videos, which is kind of something that I'm still struggling with, because when you think about YouTube or when you think about commenting on a video on social media, it's organic, yeah? You don't tell people they have to comment. You don't tell people how to comment. You just let people comment. But then, of course, the problem comes in. What do you think the most common comment was when I gave no direction, Sasha? What do you think the most common comment was to all the videos? What do you think it was?
Great video.
Yep. Exactly. And you can also answer the second question really quickly. What do we learn from the comment great video?
Nothing.
well, we can maybe learn, just to be a little bit more optimistic, we might learn, oh, we're good at video editing. But beyond that, though, as you said, nothing. Because it's not video editing class, yeah? You're really, when you're looking at these videos, like I remember we were in TU 106, and one of our first assignments is for students to do the videos. And it was always like, do you remember what was the key point that was mentioned every single time we gave this video assignment? What was the thing that the students wanted us to talk more about and told us we didn't talk enough about?
The editing? You were freezing right now for a second, but I was editing, right? Yeah, exactly.
Video editing, video effects, which program to use, which software to use. But really what we realized at that point was, and we improved on this after the first year where that happened, where we ended up telling them, look, tell a story. Look at the YouTubers there. Do they have professional editing software? No. Do 1 million people still watch their videos? Oh, yeah. So you can't use that as kind of the basis on which to say, oh, well, I learned something about video. We don't do, okay, full disclosure, Sasha and I do not do video editing classes. So if you happen to be making a video, you're not going to be focusing on video editing. We're using the videos to kind of get you all to talk more about issues, whether it's in JM 204, like both of us had students make videos to stimulate further discussion, which worked pretty well for some groups, but didn't work so well with other groups. That's how it always works, unfortunately. That's why we have grades, after all, A through F. But that is something that we always are struggling with, because there is a balance there. And you've got to give enough directions, because when I didn't give any directions and said, just do it like YouTube, what happened? Great video. That's it. You are so cute. I like how you speak. And these are all things that relate to how someone speaks, the images that they use, and that's not really the content that we're trying to go for with all these kind of content. So, and the last key point I will mention is that I ended up having to make a whole bunch of rules. It sounds counterintuitive, but I had to make a whole bunch of rules saying you have to answer questions that are posted on your videos. You have to comment and say more than great video. You have to say great video because you have to give a reason. And you have to get into a conversation, which is still something that I'm still trying to figure out. Like, where do I draw the line between micromanaging their conversations and just letting them, have fun on the space without having to think so much about what should I comment? How should I comment? Am I going to lose points because I posted a great video comment? That's not really the vibe I want. Yeah. But as you said, rules are important. Like, I remember, and you can also discuss this with me as well, some people always say rules are bad, rules are terrible, you shouldn't have rules, we should all be free. But I think that what we've been noticing is that if we don't have rules, the learning just goes in so many different directions that we can't control, and then the learning, of course, gets diluted, because if we don't have rules, it's just like us pouring a bunch of water into our learning activity. It just dilutes it and then allows it just to be not solid, but people to just float away and do what they please, which is not the point of teaching and learning. Something solid has to be there. Something tangible has to be there. If there's nothing tangible, the students don't know what they're doing. And so that is a big issue with peer learning. Just how do we keep it solid, but not dilute it to the point of where, oh, we can do anything. You didn't specify specifically what we had to do, so we did this. And you didn't put it in our direction, so you can't take our grades off. I assume you had some arguments about grades as well with this, yeah?
Yeah, of course. That's like, but I submitted something. You didn't say what exactly we have to. Okay, yes, right. So yeah, you're right. You need some kind of rules, because otherwise you end up in those discussions all the time. Yeah, that's unfortunately true.
All right. So we're almost at 2 hours, but I think that we should probably start to wrap up here. So thank you all and 5 viewers, and we got 6 likes on this one. That was good. So what is our plans for the future, Sasha? Is it just going to be us two all the time?
It might be enough already, but no, it's not. We will have special guests joining us, of course. We will try to also make this a more regular thing again, because we don't want to lose our 5 viewers again. We'll be back, I think, rather soonish, and we will have guests. We will announce those guests, of course, on social media with a few more sophisticated graphics. But yeah, we definitely have some special guests, so you can look forward to that.
All right. So we're not going anywhere, and we're going to be back relatively soon. But I'm going to end the session there. Thanks very much again to my co-host, Ajahn Sasha. Lovely pictures, by the way. I didn't notice that until just now. I think you have a monkey there with the glasses, and then it really looks like you're sprucing up the place. Yeah,
that's the can't hear, can't see in like monkey style, pop culture. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll talk more about that, I think, in future sessions. But
right.
I'm going to change the graphic though. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to follow us on social media. It's down below my picture. I'm not going to try pointing because I pointed in the wrong direction. So I'm going to get rid of this. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Ajahn², AJS², spelled out for you. It's right below my video. I'm not going to point again. You can see it. So thank you all for watching, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next one. So thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thanks.